Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Just the News, Real America's Voice special report, Washington Whiffs, a recap of 2021. It's hard to believe that this year is almost over, but when it started, we need to remind ourselves where we started this year. Joe Biden came in as president, and his mission was to end COVID, to show that big government, this was his idea, big government can solve all the problems in America, whether it's crime, COVID, the economy. Well, 10, 11 months in, that hasn't happened. In fact, the courts, the American people have spoken with extraordinary strength and repetitiveness that big government is not working in America. And as that has happened, we've seen an enormous dynamic of state governors, of local school boards and others intervening, stepping in, using the concept of federalism that our founding fathers gave us to solve the problems that Washington has either created, exacerbated, or failed to solve. It's an extraordinary dynamic, and it is going to be the issue, this idea of big government versus federalism, that will probably dominate most of 2022. Joining me now to break down all of the failures and the successes of 2021 is our good friend Jessica Anderson, the Executive Director of Heritage Action for America, our partner for tonight's show. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
John, thanks for having me.
It's been a crazy year, and when I was doing this flyover, getting ready for this, it's hard to imagine how many failures we've actually seen this year. But let's start with COVID-19. Back in June 2021, President Biden prematurely declared victory over the coronavirus. Take a listen to this.
As I said, we're heading into, God willing, the summer of joy, a summer of freedom. On July 4, we're going to celebrate our independence from the virus as we celebrate our independence of our nation. We want everyone to be able to do that. Let's remember, we are the United States of America.
Well, it became the summer of the Delta, didn't it, Jessica? It wasn't over at all. It was a premature victory declaration. President Biden, Dr. Fauci, they reacted to the resurgence of the virus by imposing more mandates on the American people, particularly vaccine mandates for federal workers, contractors, healthcare workers, private business. That hasn't fared too well, Jessica. Tell us what happened when big government tried to get bigger on the coronavirus.
Well, the Biden administration's tact to dealing with the coronavirus shows that they learned nothing of how we dealt with 2020 and the year of 2020. The truth is that these blue state lockdowns, these onerous and heavy-handed mandates, all they do is further entrench the hurt and the harm of this virus across the country, leaving businesses shuttered, leaving schools a complete disaster where kids aren't learning or they're forced to mask up. And then throughout the summer, you begin to see this slow turn of, okay, well, you can be free to return to work if you get the jab. You're free to open your business if you make all your employees get tested weekly or go get the COVID-19 vaccine. And so, the entire process of how the Biden administration has dealt with COVID-19 shows that they think they're in charge of freedom. They're not. Yeah. And they think that this is something that they can give and take away from people. They can't. Freedom doesn't come from the government. It comes from God. And that has been on full display this last year. And it shows that they learned nothing about how to deal with this virus from 2020 and have put 2021 in even more of a disaster as we end the year.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. We enter into the 2022 with more uncertainty that we entered into 2021 with. It's remarkable. I want to switch to another issue, border security. If you remember, just a few months ago, Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas had this to say about the borders, declaring that they're secure. Have a look.
Martha, good morning. The message is quite clear. Do not come. The border is closed. The border is secure.
Clearly, the border is not secure. 1,007,000 illegal aliens can prove that. But I want to ask about this. We keep having these moments in the Biden administration where the government keeps telling us something, but Americans can see with their own eyes it isn't true. How has that affected the American electorate? And also, as that has gone on, talk about how states and states' rights, governors, attorneys general have sprung into action to solve a border crisis that Washington actually created.
I'm so thankful for the American people to see through spin like that. I mean, you hear that and you just know it is not true. You see the busloads that are coming to cities all across America, bringing illegal immigrants into towns, so much so that every city across the country feels like a border town because of how the Biden administration has opened the border, made it so porous, and then how they've completely ignored the rule of law on our southern border. And it's a huge disappointment. And in the face of that, the American people have said no. And in a lot of ways, they've actually bolstered many Republican governors, like Governor DeSantis, to use the tools of a state like Florida, a state that is pretty far from the southern border in reality, but use that state, that as a bully pulpit, to go in and to say, no, I'm going to send National Guard to the border to secure it. If you won't, I will. And how they've actually handled the influx of illegal immigrants into the state of Florida. Governor DeSantis has done a great job at standing up and promoting security for the cities all up and down the state. And I think a lot of other states in the country could take a page from his playbook to say, no, we're not going to give in to this porous border and allowing illegal immigrants to flood all of our social services, our schools, our elections going forward. And instead, let's actually work to secure the border, protect Americans, and ensure that we don't have this porousness at the southern part.
Yeah, such an amazing thing going on in Florida. Even the creation of a state militia, really amazing new ideas coming out of that state. One Washington failure that everybody feels every time they go to the gas pumps is rising energy prices and inflation. I just have to ask this, how did we go in 11 months from being completely energy independent to reliant on OPEC and the cost of gasoline going up by more than $1 and doesn't look like it's going to stop?
All the Biden-Harris administration had to do with energy was nothing. The Trump-Pence energy independence doctrine put America finally in the driver's seat when it came to energy prices, when it came to how we could heat our households across the country, and the cost of paying at the pump. All they had to do was nothing. And instead, one of the first actions that Biden did when he took office was to shut down the Keystone Pipeline and then take additional steps throughout the country to lessen our energy independence. That was a huge mistake, and we are paying for that now, months later, and you add in inflation, and this is the disaster that we're in.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Don't fix what ain't broken. It may be the lesson of that one, I'll tell you that. Another defining moment of 2020 came with the bungled U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan back in August. 13 men and women in uniform were killed. Hundreds of American citizens and thousands of our best allies in Afghanistan were left fighting for their lives, trying to find freedom in the absence of an American effort. Yet President Biden made this declaration to the American people. Listen to this.
The extraordinary success of this mission was due to the incredible skill, bravery, and selfless courage of the United States military and our diplomats and intelligence professionals.
I don't think the American people believe the Afghan exit was a success at all. What has to be done to America? What is it? The failed exit. What did it do to America standing across the globe, and how do we fix it? Because both allies and foes seem to be affected by what we did there.
Well, unfortunately, the entire world saw America's weakness in how the Biden administration handled this withdrawal. There's two conversations going on right now, I think, across the country. Should the United States military be in a place like Afghanistan? Yes or no? And then when we decide that, how do we then move forward? So where we are today is we have to go back to restoring peace and stability across the country and here in the United States. We can do two things at once. We can crack down on crime, support law enforcement, secure the border here in the United States, and ensure that we continue to protect and support and lift up our brave military that are serving overseas. These goals don't have to be mutually exclusive, but what the Biden administration has shown is that they're not willing or capable of doing either. And the Afghanistan withdrawal put this front of center, unfortunately, into a lot of other leaders across the globe that are looking at it and seeing, hey, I can take advantage of the United States. Look what Putin is doing now with Ukraine. Look what China has continued to do the last 18 months. So this is concerning. We can get out of it, though. And to do that, we have to both put America first, deal with our problems at home, and support the troops that we have abroad so that they know that we can have peace and stability globally, but only with a strong America.
Yeah, such an important point. We got about a minute left. I just want to ask this. One of the things that seems to be the catalyst for change in America right now is states' rights. How important are governors, attorneys generals, and the grassroots of America that Hoffa touches every day? How important are they to changing the destiny of America right now?
Look no further than the incredible work that states did around the issue of election integrity throughout this year. They tackled state reforms so head on. Florida, Texas, Arizona, Iowa, Georgia, all did this in a major way. I'm so thankful that the 2 million grassroots activists as part of Heritage Action helped support this effort, that governors stood up and said, no, I'm going to make it easier to vote and harder to cheat. These are the reforms I want to see on my desk by the end of state legislative sessions. Doing that ensured that enough pressure was here in Washington that the Pelosi, Schumer, S1, HR1, complete disaster of a federal overtake of a bill never passed. It never made its way through Congress because the states took care of election integrity and said no to the federal government.
And Heritage Action was right in the middle of that, really getting the best ideas and the grassroots behind it. What an amazing accomplishment that was. And what a year it's been, Jessica. Thanks for helping us make some sense of it.
Thanks for having me, John.
All right, folks, when we come back from the break, we're going to pick up where we left off and ask the question, where is all that grassroots energy going to go in 2022? We'll answer it for you right after this commercial break.
Putting critical race theory into our classrooms is taking our nation in the wrong direction.
Parents, the longer that you wait and you don't hold your child's schools accountable gives these guys more time to dictate what's best for your child's physical, mental, and emotional health.
If you have materials that you're providing where it says if you were born a white male, you were born an oppressor, you are abusing our children.
The communist regime used the same critical theory to divide people. The only difference is they use class instead of race.
I worked myself from off the streets to where I am right now. You gonna sit here and tell me this lie of critical race theory? This the reason why black folks can't get ahead because of white folks? Are you kidding me?
Racism in America would by and large be dead today if it were not for certain people and institutions keeping it on life support. Putting critical race theory into our classrooms is not combating racism, it's fanning the flames of what little embers are left.
All right, folks, welcome back for the commercial break. Two of the biggest failures of 2021 in Washington continue to resonate as we head into the new year. The first is the nation's energy crisis, fueled by high prices and supply shortages, and the latter is the botched withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan that disheartened our allies and emboldened our foes. Joining me now is the number 2 Republican in the House, Whip Steve Scalise from the great state of Louisiana, to talk about how we got there with these two problems and how we solve them. Congressman, welcome to the show.
John, it's great to be back with you, and Merry Christmas in advance, but I appreciate the opportunity.
You as well, and thank you for all you do. Listen, I want to start with the country's emerging energy crisis. You're from an energy state. You know this really well. We entered the year being energy independent with low gas prices when President Trump turned the keys to Joe Biden, and we ended as energy dependent on OPEC with vastly higher prices at the pumps. How did that happen, first, on Joe Biden's watch? And secondly, how do we extract ourselves from that crisis?
Yeah, John, it started, as you pointed out, a year where we were completely dominant, not only producing enough energy to take care of our own needs here at home, but we were exporting energy, oil, natural gas. We were helping our friends around the world. We were reducing the influence and leverage that countries like Russia had. And then you go to day one of Joe Biden's administration, and you don't need to look far to find out where this problem happened. Day one, he killed the Keystone Pipeline, thousands of good American jobs. Then he started going down the road of this crazy radical Green New Deal where they crush American energy. But again, if fossil fuels were their enemy, which they purport, number one, why is Joe Biden begging countries, OPEC countries, Russia, to produce more oil when we can produce more here at home, except he's shut the spigots off in so many areas on federal lands. They've made it more difficult to produce energy everywhere in America, and it's led to higher gas prices. And I'm talking 60% higher gas prices than what people were paying a year ago. That's something that hits low-income families the hardest. That is the first big tax that Joe Biden imposed on hardworking families. breaking his promise that you wouldn't pay higher taxes if you made less than 400,000. People making 40,000 are paying dramatically higher for everything. Inflation across the board, from energy to the grocery store, is at an all-time high. You have to go back to the Jimmy Carter era to find a time this bad. And frankly, I think this is worse than the Jimmy Carter era. So it was all created by Joe Biden's day one policies. And unfortunately, he's doubled down on failure. And that's why you're seeing a revolt across the country. It's why you saw what happened in Virginia and so many other states. People don't want this kind of radical far left big government socialism.
Yeah, we the people are definitely beginning to speak very loudly. I want to ask you a question. That you've got this reconciliation bill that has $500 billion plus for the Green New Deal components that AOC has always wanted to get done. If that passes the Senate, what does it do to the energy crisis? Do we get better or worse with that legislation in place?
John, it makes it much worse. And in fact, it makes inflation much worse. I'll tell you one thing that families get across the country, even though Joe Biden, Pelosi, and others are trying to hide this, the spending in Washington is driving inflation back home. And what people have said over and over in states from Virginia to New Jersey to other states is stop the spending first. Get spending under control in Washington, and then give us our freedom back. And there's common sense that's just been thrown out the window since COVID started. There's ways to protect people. Good governors have shown you how to protect people and protect freedom at the same time. And frankly, the governors that took away your freedom, in many cases, they have worse health outcomes as well. So they're not protecting people, and they're surely not protecting freedom. So I think those both are at a premium. I wish we could get back to the things that were working. You don't have to look far and wide to figure it out. But big government socialism is what created this problem.
Yeah, people are really waking up to that. They voted for Joe Biden and his big government solution, and they found out they had buyer's remorse very quickly. Pretty amazing dynamic. So quickly, too. I want to switch gears for a second and touch base on another consequential moment in the Biden presidency this year. The U.S. military's bungled withdrawal from Afghanistan. How has that changed our standing in the world? And do you think it has emboldened adversaries like Russia, what they're doing in Ukraine right now, and China with all the saber rattling on Taiwan?
Yeah, and in Afghanistan, it was so heartbreaking to see what happened the way Joe Biden did it. Again, Donald Trump wanted to withdraw troops from Afghanistan, but he also wasn't going to turn the country over to a terrorist organization in the Taliban. And so he reduced the footprint. We were down to 2,500 troops. We didn't have a single loss of life for a year and a half, thank God. But then Joe Biden comes in and he just goes down on his own. The generals were saying, don't withdraw all the troops immediately. And by the way, if you do, the first thing you ought to do is get all the Americans out, get your allies out, get the $85 billion of military equipment out that he gave over. The best military technology in the world was handed over, again, to a terrorist organization, and now China has access to that. And so what Afghanistan did, not only was it horrible for the 13 service members who lost their lives in that suicide bombing attack, probably the suicide bomber came from the air base that Joe Biden turned over to the Taliban, where they had a prison and they let everybody out. But it also, I think, pulled the veil back on Joe Biden's competence. That's when we really started to see nationally, even people who voted for Joe Biden said, wait a minute, now I wonder if he's even competent to be president, not just on foreign policy, but on domestic policy. And you've seen his numbers plummet since Afghanistan, because we have a lot of crises in America, John, but I think the biggest crisis we have is a confidence of competence in our president. And that's a scary thing.
Yeah, listen, only 1 in 4 Americans in a recent poll said they want Joe Biden to run again. They're already done with him. It's an amazing turn. I've never seen anything.
Including Democrats.
Many Democrats, yeah, no doubt.
And they don't want Kamala Harris either, but they surely don't have confidence in the president. It's not good for the country.
No, it's not. No, it's not at all. Obviously, Republicans are the minority party in Washington, but they're the majority party in many states. And I want to ask you, what are some of the novel ways that Republicans can try to fix some of the problems that Washington has created before the 2022 election? What can be done next year?
Yeah, this is where leadership at the state level is so important, because it shows that good leadership can actually yield good results, and failed leadership is what ultimately gets you into trouble. And you don't have to look further than the states that are gaining population and losing population. We're in the middle of a census where the census is over, but the redrawing of district lines across the country is happening. Right. California, for the first time in their history, is losing a seat in Congress because millions of people left, because big government socialists control everything. I call it states where there's liberal utopia, where you have Democrats running everything from the governorship down to the local level. New York, California, Illinois, go down the line. Those are all, by the way, coincidentally, states where you've seen devastating failures, from crime out of control to shutdowns that have crushed small businesses, taken away opportunities, schools being shut down where parents aren't even being allowed to get involved in their kids' education and see the curriculum. They're being deemed by the Biden administration as domestic terrorists. And then you go look at states like Florida, Texas, other Republican-run states where they've trusted people. They've trusted science and people. They've allowed freedom to reign with science. And what they've had is better health outcomes, and they've had really strong economies, the ability for people to hold on to their jobs, to hold on to their small businesses, for kids to go to school in a safe and effective way where kids are learning. The suicide rates that you're seeing in states where they're shutting everything down are different from one state to the other. So all of these things are, I think, a real good example of what good, strong, bold conservative leadership can do to empower people, trust people, and yield you freedom and opportunity. And then in the Democrat-run states where they've shut everything down and they want to control your life, it's about government control versus freedom. It's never, I think, been more on display and contrasted than today in the hard red states and the hard blue states.
Yeah, so true. We got about 30 seconds left. I want to ask you this. What's the question you want voters when they walk into that ballot booth next November? What's the question you want voters to ask themselves before they cast that ballot?
When they cast their ballot, it's going to be a very personal question. Which candidate and which party, because you're voting for both when you're voting for Congress, is going to give me the best opportunity to have control over my life and my destiny and my freedom? Those are the things people care about. They care about their kids and their kids' opportunity, and they care about the ability to have control over their life, not government telling them what to do.
The essence of America.
And Republicans win, by the way, on all of those fronts.
They do. They do. Congressman, thank you so much for your time today. A lot of wisdom there to spread around before the holidays, and a blessed Christmas to you and your family.
Great being with you. Merry Christmas and happy holidays.
Thank you, sir. Stick around, folks. Indiana Attorney General Todd Rokita joins us after the break to talk about how the southern border crisis affects his state in Indiana, right after this commercial break. All right, folks, welcome back from the commercial break. One of the most successful forces of resistance to Washington's ever-expanding powers in 2021 has been the attorneys general in the states. There's lawsuits on everything from border policy to vaccine mandates have repeatedly prevailed in the courts, handing President Biden an unprecedented string of legal losses in his first year in office. Joining me now is one of those attorneys general, Todd Rokita, from the great state of Indiana. Attorney General Rokita, it's an honor to have you on the program today.
Oh, the honor's mine. Thanks, John.
You know, most Americans might not consider Indiana a border state, but the truth is the surge of 1.7 million illegal immigrants across this border this year has been flooding the interior of this country. And this year, you helped take the lead in organizing 15 states in suing to force the Biden administration to enforce the Trump-era Remain in Mexico policy. Explain to us why that policy is important to Middle America and the outcome you achieved.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and it really it's an effort amongst Arizona and Texas, Florida, the true border states, the direct border states, I should say, and then a lot of other concerned states who help those states in court through amicus briefs, through leading other kind of efforts in the briefing stage of these suits. And the reason I've led Indiana into this sphere is because we call it Hoosier common sense. We apply it to our lives generally, but it's only Hoosier common sense, John, that would tell you that, you know, when that fentanyl comes across the border in Texas, when the drugs come and the human trafficking comes across the border in Arizona and vice versa, it doesn't stop there in those states. It ends up in states like Indiana. You know, we have 6 or so major interstate systems that are directly linked to the border states.
Right.
So it's really easy to understand that the sex trafficking, the drugs end up in our state. We have 4 ports. So we're all in this together, so to speak, in a very, unfortunately, negative way. And we have got to work together to fight back against really what is a hatred. I don't use that word lightly, but a hatred for the rule of law by this administration, and really, a dislike for the sovereignty of this nation, and putting America. We went from putting America first to putting America last, and now the states have to step up, and this is just one way we're doing it.
Yeah, there's no doubt. Are you surprised by how many losses the Biden administration has racked up in court? The courts have really spoken and said, you, Joe Biden, you keep overreaching, you keep exceeding the Constitution. How surprised are you that he's been rebuked so many times already?
Well, in a way, it shouldn't be surprising at all, because it's such a clear overreach. But you never know when you go into court. You just never know how things are going to act, but how things are going to happen. But it started with this eviction moratorium that the court said, okay, you got to stop the moratorium, and they tried to go on and do it anyway. But we have been winning on these vaccine mandates, and you're right, 4-0 so far. And part of that is because, a large part of that is because the states, again, are coordinating so well in a good faith, ethical way in terms of covering our bases in terms of going to court, making sure we're doing things that are complementary to each other in terms of our legal position, our legal case, making sure that we have the circuits covered with these various lawsuits, that we could try to get a correct ruling. And so that's going really well. I'm really, in that sense, proud to be part of a larger group, even though I'm an individually elected executive officer in the state of Indiana. It's good to have like-minded leaders in other states who understand the state's proper role in a federalist system. And you see that happening every day, and it's absolutely fascinating to me, and I'm thankful for it. These are David and Goliath battles, and in the secular sense, John, I'm glad to have a lot more Davids.
And you know what? It's what our founding fathers intended. I mean, what you're seeing right now, you see state rights and individual freedom just rising up in a way I haven't seen it in my 30 years in Washington. And no place has that been more clear than with the vaccine mandates. You filed a lawsuit to stop the Biden administration from forcing vaccine mandates on your own state's healthcare workers. The court spoke pretty clearly there. What is the message that the courts are sending to the Biden presidency, and are they listening?
Well, let's go back to the border for just 1 second. The court said the Remain in Mexico policy, right? So this is the Trump idea, which is the correct one, that, okay, you want to come across the border, we caught you, but we're not going to just turn you loose into the interior of the country. We're going to send you to Mexico where you'll remain until your hearing happens. I mean, that changes, John, the whole dynamic. That disincentivizes the whole reason to come across the border illegally in the first place. That, when the court did that, that was a great day. And the court said by December 6th, this has to happen. So that's just a few days ago.
Right.
And so time will tell whether the Biden administration will listen. But I think it's complicated enough, and it deals with Mexico itself and their government, that they might actually do it. And so that's different than the moratorium that they try to ignore. And so now you roll forward, John, into the vaccine mandates, and time will tell. The good thing is, I think we'll be in the Supreme Court maybe even before Christmas, and maybe this is all resolved before the threshold of when the executive order otherwise would take effect. That would be January 4th. But again, courts have stayed these mandates across the country now, and that stay will stay in place until the Supreme Court maybe finally decides it. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, a huge success and a proof that states' rights work. It's really a remarkable thing. With COVID-19, there's a lot of demagoguery, right? If you fight a mask mandate, the media say, "Oh, you're against vaccine," but you're not. Actually, you guys care about health and public health. And what's really interesting is there was a one-size-fit-all approach to Washington for the pandemic, but states like yours in Indiana and Florida with Ron DeSantis, they're actually creating unique solutions tailored to the people that they represent. How has that been empowering for someone like you and the governor?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I believe, and just speaking for myself, not necessarily our governor, that these kind of decisions to vaccinate or not, it depends on so many factors. We are not the same. By God's design, we are not the same people.
That's right.
Each one of us is different. We have different comorbidities, if any. We are different ages. We are different weights. And all that has to be considered in whether or not to take what is still very much an experimental drug. You could say what you want about, oh, the FDA blessed it, but nothing substitutes for time. And, there's a reason, not just bureaucracy, that the FDA takes 5 years, sometimes 10 years to approve a drug, is because they got to wait to see what the real effect of the substance is. Are you going to grow two noses or not? Whatever the situation is.
Yeah.
And so this is very much an experimental vaccine, and it may make sense depending on your personal situation in consultation with your doctor. The point is that the last thing we need in the society is a politician telling us what we need and don't. And that's that individual liberty we're trying to preserve.
Yeah, absolutely. We got about 30 seconds left. I want to ask you this. Indiana is the crossroads of America. What is the mood of the electorate in Middle America, and how might it affect the 2022 elections?
Yeah. Look, Indiana, I think by and large has declared victory over not only the vaccine, but over socialism.
Right.
And we're ready to take our country back. And that's not even a partisan statement. That's just an American statement. And Indiana wants to help lead the way. We certainly want to do our fair share to get this country righted.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt there's some amazing examples thanks to your office. Sir, thanks so much for helping us out today and sharing what's going on in the great state of Indiana.
Yeah, thank you, John. Great to be here.
Same here. All right, folks, stick around. Congressman Mary Miller joins us next. You're not going to want to miss what she has to say about critical race theory. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. As we discussed earlier in the show with Jessica Anderson, no political issue in 2021 galvanized everyday Americans more than critical race theory. Stuck at home during the pandemic, parents began seeing what was being taught to their kids, and they were not happy. Congresswoman Mary Miller from the great state of Illinois has been one of the most cogent voices in Washington, leading the fight against extremist ideologies in schools. And she joins us now to describe how the grassroots and the states have succeeded where Uncle Sam has failed. Congresswoman Miller, great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. This is an important topic.
It sure is. Critical race theory was really discovered by most Americans in the last year, but it's in the works for years, fostered in some cases by bureaucrats in Washington, feeding local school districts curriculum ideas and money. Tell us what you learned about that dynamic.
Well, I think that we can look at the positives that's come out of COVID, and the fact that we've had more transparency than we've ever had in light of the curriculum that our kids are and teachers are being subjected to has been a fantastic thing. Parents want their children to be smart. They want them to be proficient in the core subjects. And whether it's critical race theory, transgender ideas, or this perverted sex ed curriculum, we don't want our kids being occupied with these damaging ideas.
Yeah, and it's funny, as parents began to speak up, political leaders and bureaucrats started to push back. And so you recently led this initiative with other members of the Illinois congressional delegation to persuade the Illinois Association of School Boards to disassociate from the National School Board Association. That's the group, if everyone remembers, that suggested protesting parents were domestic terrorists, and they sicked the FBI on them. Congressman, what inspired you to lead that initiative, and what has happened in your state school board group since it started?
Yeah, well, actually, the letter that the National School Board Association wrote to the Biden administration inspired me to do that. And the fact that parents are on board completely, I've said for a long time, we need to take back our community schools. And our schools should be allowed to reflect the values of the community where they are. I was excited and actually kind of surprised that the Illinois School Board Association did quickly terminate the relationship with the National School Board Association. We're one of the first ones. And yesterday I heard that 26 state school board associations have discontinued their relationship with the National School Board Association, which is fantastic. We need to have transparency and we need to have accountability. And real people are fighting back. They're awake now. We're woke. We're the woke ones.
How about that? Who would have thought that was going to happen? That's great. There was a moment back in October where Glenn Youngkin and Terry McAuliffe were on stage together in debate. And Terry McAuliffe uttered what I think is the dirty secret about CRT and those who provide it, which is we, the bureaucrats, we, the politicians, don't believe parents should have a say in what happens in their school, their children's education. How seminal a moment was that for all the things that have flowed since it?
Well, I mean, that was a turning point in the election. And I think that that election has really riled the rest of the country up, that there is hope and regular people can get involved on the state and local levels. You know, I'm through the whole election process. I've met so many fantastic people, but I met this one mom from Nashville, Tennessee, and she actually homeschooled her children, but she found out that their public school system was using an anti-American civics curriculum, which is shocking. So she got a lot of people involved. They went to the school board, the next school board meeting after they found this out, and addressed it with the school board. The school board promptly ignored the parents and the taxpayers. So 4 months later, there was a school board election and they turned over 6 seats in that school board election. So I hope that me telling that story inspires people to go to the school boards, to get them to be transparent on what's going on in the schools and the curriculum they're using. And if they don't get the response and the result that they feel like is best for their children, they need to run for school board.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing to see so many parents now entering politics to be warriors in this fight. One of the things that has been really impressive in watching is that where the federal government and these school bureaucracies have tried to overextend their influence in children's lives, that the states have been exercising their own rights. The legislature, the governors, in some cases, executive orders. How important are state rights in this era of big government in Washington?
Well, it's the firewall to this out of control federal government, definitely. And, you know, we're involved in every level, my family, my children. And I want to encourage people that we live in a representative republic, and our system won't work unless the regular people get involved. So.
Such an important point. Getting involved is the key. I want to switch gears on you for a second and look at rising crime. In your home state, the great city of Chicago, the police superintendent there recently blamed all the spike in violent crime blamed it on progressive policies. Describe why so many big blue cities in America you think are having this rising crime problem and how Washington has failed to intervene and do something to get us back to law and order.
Right. Well, the progressives are actually Marxist communists. This is part of a plan to take over our country. They aren't anti-police. What they are is anti-local police. And they're moving forward this agenda to create anarchy because they want to bring in police and control from the top, from the federal government. So these anti-police policies are terrible for our communities. I hope that the big cities that have turned election over, at least in Illinois is a conservative state if you take out 3 counties. Right. I hope people in those counties are waking up and realizing that the progressives do not represent them. If people don't feel safe and their stomachs are empty, nothing else matters. And the next thing they care about is good education. That is the segue for us to turn these elections back to the people.
Yeah, and it seems like there are these forces lining up to make 2022 a real referendum on the difference between big government, maybe federalism or return to federalism. That seems to benefit the Republican slate. It seems like on all the issues, crime, coronavirus, mask mandates, Republicans are now in the lead in the polls in ways we haven't seen in decades. How important is the 2022 election, and how should Republicans play the election to make sure that they win?
Well, it's extremely important. We're just hanging on. They're dismantling our system as we see it. For example, having an open border and then talking about granting mass amnesty, you can just plan on that being the end of our country. Their ideas are just horrifically damaging. So I believe that we are going to have a landslide victory in 2022, and then hopefully we can put the brakes on some of this.
Yeah. I got about 30 seconds left. I just want to ask you, what are the four key issues that your constituents in Illinois are most concerned about heading into this election year?
Well, I think freedom, the border, of course, the economy, and China. I think people are concerned. They've realized that China is definitely our enemy, and they're concerned about how representatives in D.C., including our president and his son, have sold us out to our enemy. So definitely those things.
Yeah, those are definitely the most important ones. Everywhere I go, people are talking about those issues. Congresswoman Mary Miller, thank you so much for your valuable insight today. We really enjoyed it.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, my honor. We're going to take a quick commercial break, folks. When we come back, the brand new president of the Heritage Foundation, Dr. Kevin Roberts, will be joining us to talk about the future of the conservative movement as we enter the new year. We'll be right back. You're not going to want to miss this interview. All right, folks, welcome back from the commercial break. We've had a poignant discussion tonight about the issues where Washington is failing and where states have stepped in with solutions, from the pandemic to the border. And many of our guests have suggested this movement toward federalism, toward states' rights, is only going to get bigger as we head into the new year. One of the biggest proponents in Washington of states' rights is the influential think tank, the Heritage Foundation. And joining us now is Dr. Kevin Roberts, the brand new president of Heritage. Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
John, thanks so much for having me. It's a great pleasure.
Yeah, it is. It's going to be a fun discussion. You know, one of the places where big government in Washington is failing right now is in the court system, where courts and judges have repeatedly reigned in the Biden administration and affirmed states' rights. Heritage has one of those key lawsuits challenging vaccine mandates. Why did you guys get involved in suing, and why do you think the courts are ruling so often against this president?
Well, we proceeded for the first time in our 48-year history in filing a lawsuit with the Heritage Foundation as a plaintiff, because it is the actions of the Biden regime are that unprecedented. And so we believe, for the sake of the sacrosanct relationship between employer and employees here, but most of all, to the heart of your question, for the overreach that Biden and Harris are initiating every day, that the Heritage Foundation has to stand up for that, everyone who's fighting that overreach. It's really important that we understand that intrinsically, that is just on the vaccine mandate initiated by OSHA, that lawsuit is justified. But even more than that, this is the key point, John, if we don't stand up against that, then this regime is going to implement a lot of other examples of overreach in the coming months and years. It's really important that we draw a line in the sand.
Yeah, that was an earthquake in Washington, a really historic moment for Heritage. It was really something. One of my favorite op-eds of the last few weeks has been the one you wrote called Tomorrow's Heritage, in which you outline your vision for Heritage and your prognosis on the future of the conservative movement. What does that future look like, both for Heritage and the conservative movement, as we head into 2022?
Well, thanks for your kind comments. That's great coming from you. I'm a fan of your work, as I mentioned to you last week. The point is that Tomorrow's Heritage is one that, while we'll always be headquartered in D.C., we're going to spend a lot less time worried about what's happening in D.C. We are always going to be the beachhead behind enemy lines for the conservative movement. In other words, our friends at the state and local level who are doing such great work cultivating the future of conservatism know that when their reforms get to the point where they need federal action, the Heritage Foundation will be leading the efforts here in D.C. But the second point, John, is that Heritage, as it has already begun to do, is going to be very active in state legislatures next year. We're going to be working on immigration reform. And, there are a couple of things that states can do. I helped lead some of those efforts in my previous stop in Texas. We're going to be involved in every school choice effort in any state that is looking at universal school choice. We're going to clean up election laws. Obviously, Heritage has played a key role in that in 2021. That's just a sample of what we're going to be doing. But tomorrow's Heritage is one that looks a lot like America rather than nation's capital.
Yeah, that's going to be news, great news to a lot of activists and grassroots folks in the states who are so excited about what you're bringing to Heritage. The balance between power in Washington and the states has been tilted in recent years, clearly towards the federal government, maybe since after 9/11. How can those who are concerned about these imbalances at the grassroots level tip that balance back toward federalism in the states? What can they do to engage with you and other groups to start that momentum even greater?
Well, they can always visit us at heritage.org, but what they need to do even more importantly than that, because we're relying on the following, John, is that they need to keep going to school board meetings. They need to keep going to city council meetings. They need to keep calling their state legislators. We want that army of grassroots activists, some of whom are active in the political process for the first time in their lives, to be pushing on overreach by school boards and city councils and states. And I believe firmly that working shoulder to shoulder with them in every state capital and here in the nation's capital, that the Heritage Foundation can amplify the great work of every conservative in this country.
Yeah, such an important point. And, Heritage does so much to put thought leadership into the conservative movement on things like shrinking government, where we can shrink government, where states can pick up some of the slack, where we can get freedom back to the Americans. What are some of the research and things that you'll be making available as tools at Heritage for everyday Americans to embrace?
People know that we do on every public policy issue facing the country really important research. Some of the research that I think is the most helpful are those indices. We have an index of economic liberty. We have very soon being released an index of election laws. And so people are going to be able to see a scorecard, sort of a report card of their state election laws. Those are the kinds of research tools that our scholars have spent years doing, and we update annually, as you know. And that's the kind of thing that regular people would never have the time to do, in the same way that I'm not going to have the time, the colleagues here at Heritage are not going to have the time to visit every local school board meeting. This is what I mean by the complementarity of what the activists are doing and what we're doing. Working shoulder to shoulder, we're going to take back this country.
Yeah, such an incredible mission. We got about a minute left. As you look into 2022, what issue do you think the electorate is going to turn on? Is it really a question of is government too big? Do you think that will be the defining issue of the 2022 election?
I think the average American is going to verbalize that in a little bit more specific way, and that is that government is too big, not just at the federal level, but government is too big at the state level and at the school board level. They're seeing that in the indoctrination of their children.
Right. Yeah, such an important point. Yeah, very cogent. Dr. Roberts, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. We can feel the energy coming out of that building at Heritage and can't wait to see what you do next. Well, folks, that just about does it for our tonight's special. A big thanks to our partners at Heritage Action for America for sponsoring tonight's event, and to Real America's Voice for hosting us here. Tonight, we surveyed a half dozen major points of failure in Washington that occurred here in 2021 and identified how states and the courts have stepped in to fill the gaps, correct the problem. And we've talked to experts who see that trend accelerating as we go into the new year. As it does, the disconnect between the Washington power brokers and everyday Americans on Main Street is going to be growing. And that is something we'll be covering closely here at Just the News and Real America's Voice. We thank you for watching and ask that God bless you and this great country that is the United States of America. Good night.